All right, y'all. This is Stories, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Chapter 1. Huck is Civilized. Tom's Gang, Fish Hooks. Unless you've read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which I hope you have, you don't know me. That book ended with Tom Sawyer and me finding hidden money in a cave. Because we found it, Judge Thatcher let us keep it. He put it in a bank for us, and we got $1 a day. By anybody's standards, we were rich. I've taken care of myself most of my life, though I'm still a kid. I wore what I wanted, slept where I wanted. After I became rich, a woman named Widow Douglas adopted me. She said she was going to civilize me. She dressed me up in fancy clothes that itched and made me sweat. I ran away once, but Tom Sawyer found me and talked me into coming back. Widow Douglas had rules aplenty. You had to come when she rang a bell, learn about dead people in the Bible, say prayers over food, sit straight, stand straight, and not smoke, even though she dipped snuff. I put up with it until Widow Douglas's sister, Miss Watson, came to live with us. She tried to teach me to read. I told her no thanks. She told me I'd go to the bad place. I told her that would be fine by me. Since she had said earlier that Tom Sawyer would be there, I figured I'd be in good company. After that lecture, I stole upstairs and sat by the window. Owls hooted about someone who had died. Dogs and whippoorwills told about people going to die. I flipped a spider off me. It dropped in the candle wax and shriveled up before I could get it out. Something bad was about to happen. Miss Watson and Widow Douglas snored down the hall. The clock in the town square struck 12. I heard a twig snap. Meow, meow, came out of the darkness. I smiled. I called back like a cat, blew out the candle, climbed out the window onto the shed roof, and jumped to the ground. Tom Sawyer waited for me behind a tree. Miss Watson was very prim and proper, but she still owned a slave. His name was Jim. They didn't let him come in the house, so he had to sleep on the porch. I bet he didn't have to learn to read either. Just as Tom and I snuck by Jim, I tripped on a root and made a noise. "Who's there?" Jim asked as he woke up. Tom and I dropped to the ground. Jim came down the steps and stood right beside us. After about 5 minutes, he said, "I'll just sit down here until I hear that noise again. Then I'll catch you." Lord, if he didn't sit right between Tom and me and almost hit me in the face with his foot. His sitting didn't last long, though, because soon he started snoring. Tom gave me the signal to follow. We crept down to the river and met Ben Rogers, Joe Harper, and a few other waiting boys. We unhitched a small flat-bottomed boat and, using a pole, piloted it down the river to a rocky bluff. As we climbed ashore, we had no idea where Tom intended to take us. We finally stopped hiking at a clump of bushes. Tom made us swear to keep everything a secret. We all agreed. Tom ordered Joe Harper to light the candles. We then got down on our hands and knees and crawled into a hole that led into a huge underground cave. "We're going to be a band of robbers," Tom said. He always said we would be something. This time, it was robbers. Anyone who wants to join Tom Sawyer's gang must sign his name in blood. We all agreed heartily. Tom took out a piece of paper after we pricked our fingers with a pin and made our marks on Tom's paper. Ben Rogers asked, "What does this club do anyway?" "Robbery," Tom said. "You mean like stealing cattle or robbing houses?" "That's not robbery," Tom said. "That's burglary. We're robbers. We rob stagecoaches. We might even ransom somebody." "What's ransom?" "Who knows," Tom said. "It's just done." "Look at little Tommy Barnes," Joe Harper exclaimed. Tommy had fallen asleep. Ben waked him up with a pinch. Tommy started crying. "That's no way to be a robber," Joe said. "I don't want to be a robber anymore," Tommy said back. Everybody made fun of him until Tommy said he would tell all of our secrets. Tom gave him 5 cents to be quiet. Tommy agreed to be silent. We argued over when we should begin robbing. Some said Sunday, but it seemed rather wicked to begin a life of robbery on the holy day. We finally decided that next week we would get together sometime to determine when we would get together. Ben Rogers called elections because every club needs officers. We all elected Tom Sawyer as first captain and Joe Harper as second captain. That's how we began. When finally I got back to the Widow Douglas's, the sun had just come up. I didn't bother taking off my filthy clothes before I went to sleep. At breakfast, Miss Watson scolded me because of my clothes. Widow Douglas kept quiet because the widow didn't fuss. I thought I'd try to be nice, but changed my mind when Miss Watson insisted I get in the closet and pray. God answers prayers, she said. It made me glad to hear it. She said I should pray to learn to obey. I prayed for fish hooks, which seemed to me more useful. When none appeared, I told Miss Watson through the closet door that praying didn't seem to work. She called me a fool. I never did get those fish hooks. All right, Chapter 2. Boot prints, dear old Pap, the cabin. School started, winter came, and I learned to read a few words and do a little math. On warm nights, I still snuck out and slept in the woods. I liked the old ways, but on cold nights, I began to like the new ways too. One morning, I spilled the salt at breakfast, which is bad luck. Before I could throw a pinch over my shoulder for good luck, Miss Watson caught me. I left the house walking kind of slow, wondering when bad luck would happen. At the garden gate, I saw a man's tracks in an inch of fresh snow. I recognized the boot print. I ran to Judge Thatcher's. I guess you've come for some of your money, the judge said. No, I replied. I don't even want to own my money. I want to give it to you. Give it to me? Oh ho, I see. You mean you want to sell me your property? Yes, I said. Don't ask me why, and I won't tell you lies. Being a judge, Judge Thatcher happily wrote up a paper that he said sold me $6,000 to him for $1 to make it legal. It didn't seem like the best deal, but the judge assured me it was the best way to go. I found Jim. He had a hairball that told people's fortunes. I told Jim I saw my pap's tracks in the snow, even though everybody told me my pap had died. Jim said something over his hairball and dropped it. It rolled a little. Jim got down on the ground and put his ear against it. It won't talk without money, Jim said. I didn't tell Jim about the $1 I had in my pocket, but gave him a fake quarter instead. Suddenly, Jim heard the hairball speak. Your pap is in town, Jim said. He's got one good angel sitting on one shoulder, and a bad angel sitting on the other. What he does next depends on which angel he listens to. I left Jim on the front porch, lit my candle, and went upstairs to my room. I shut the door. When I turned around, there was my dead pap, sitting in a chair. Very much alive, I gasped. Fancy clothes, boy. You think you're pretty sharp, don't you? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Don't get smart with me, boy. His oily black hair and whiskers dangled. His skin glowed white in the candlelight like a dead man's. His clothes smelled like pig slop and hung in rags. I hear you've learned to read and write. Yep. Well, stop it. Your dead mama never learned to read. I ain't learned to read. You ain't going to. What's this? He held up a drawing. That's a picture the teacher gave me for doing my lessons. He tore it up. Ain't no more. I hear you're rich. I ain't. Judge Thatcher's got your money, I heard. I don't have any money. Ask Judge Thatcher. I'll do that. How much money you got on you? $1? But give it to me. I gave it to him because I knew if I didn't, he'd beat me. Pap left and left me wondering what he'd do next. Pap tried to get my money, but Judge Thatcher wouldn't give it to him. Pap said he'd take Judge Thatcher to court. He started hanging around Widow Douglas's, and he treated me pretty bad when he caught a hold of me. The widow told him to leave, so he did, but he stole me with him. He put me on a flat-bottom boat, took me 3 miles up the river, and locked me in a cabin. He had a gun, so I couldn't get away. 2 months passed, and then Pap disappeared for 3 days. I thought he'd been killed or drowned. I worried I'd die locked in the cabin. I found an old saw blade and used it to try to cut my way out. Before I could finish, I heard Pap coming. He'd been to get supplies. He said his lawsuit against Judge Thatcher had almost reached the court. His lawyer said when it did, Pap would get the money. He also said the widow Douglas had sued for custody of me, and this time she might win. That meant I'd have to go back to reading. I'd like to see the widow try to get you, he said. I've got a place up in the woods where no one would ever find you. That thought scared me more than reading. What if he locked me up somewhere and never came back? I decided that during the night I'd try to escape from him and the widow Douglas. Neither life suited me at the moment. Pap started drinking while I cooked supper. A widow's got no right to steal a man's son and try to make the son better than the daddy, he said. Finally, Pap got so drunk he fell onto the bed. While I waited for him to go to sleep, I accidentally fell asleep myself. Get up, Pap said the next morning. Huh? I asked. Did somebody try to break into the cabin? He asked. No, I figured he'd seen where I tried to break out. Pap looked at me kind of funny. Then his head nodded, letting me know his brain finally caught up. He grunted, "Go see if there's any fish for breakfast." It delighted me to leave the cabin. As I walked the riverbank, I saw an empty canoe drifting down the river. I jumped into the river and brought it ashore. Pap would be happy to have it. As I climbed on the bank, though, another thought hit me. When I ran away, instead of running on foot, I could take the canoe. I hid it well in the vines. I met Pap on the path. He whooped me up the side of my head for not checking all the fish lines. I told him I fell in the river and it took some time to get back out. He believed me. We caught 5 catfish that morning. After breakfast, Pap said, "I need to go back into town. We need more bacon." Pap locked me in the cabin and I finished sawing out the hole. Then I fixed the hole back so he would not know what I'd done. I went outside to the front of the cabin, took an axe and chopped down the door. Next, I squished some boxbog berries in a cup. They looked just like blood. Most people can't tell the difference. I smeared the boxbog blood all over the cabin. I wanted Pap to think someone had attacked me. I had another idea. I took a sack of flour, cut a hole in it, and left a trail of flour from the cabin into the woods. Pap would think a thief killed me and stole the flour and his hunting gun. I grabbed the gun, some supplies and food, and hurried back to the canoe to wait for the moon to rise. Night came. Pap came up the river just as I got ready to go. I hid the canoe back in the vines. When he disappeared towards the cabin, I paddled off from the Missouri shore. I stopped several miles downriver at Jackson's Island. I thought no one would find me there. Chapter 3. Finding Jim, Our Island, the Floating House. I awoke that morning to a boom. I saw a ferry boat out on the river that was firing a cannon. I could see Pap, Judge Thatcher, Tom Sawyer, and several others on board. The cannon boom was supposed to raise a dead body in the river. They were looking for me. They shot the cannon again and straight towards me. I was deaf from the blast, blind from the smoke, and expected my spirit to rise from my body at any minute. They didn't see me. I built a campfire that night and lived lazily, eating food I had taken from the cabin and adding berries I found in the woods. After about a week, I decided to explore the island. Then I smelled something. I hurried through the brush, and before I knew it, I came upon an open space where a fresh campfire still smoked. I jumped back into the underbrush and half crawled back to my canoe. I loaded everything in and hid. By night, I had gotten mighty hungry. I knew I couldn't start a fire on the island if someone else was living on it as well, so I got in the canoe and paddled over to the Illinois side of the river. I'd just finished a hot meal when I heard horses coming. I put out my fire. "It's getting late," I heard a man say. "The horses are tired. Let's camp. We'll find him tomorrow." I paddled back to the island, thinking they were searching for me. I tried to sleep but couldn't, knowing someone might be on the island. In the dark, I got Pap's gun and began slinking through the woods. Just as daybreak, I came to the place where I'd found the fire. Lo and behold, "Hey, Jim," I said, coming out of the bushes. Miss Watson's slave jumped to his feet. "Don't hurt me," he yelled. I never done anything bad to dead people." I told him I'm not dead. He finally believed me after poking me in the stomach. "Make up the campfire," I said. "Let's eat breakfast." It made me so happy not to be lonely anymore. "What's the use when all you've got is berries?" Jim asked. "Berries?" I asked. "That's all I've eaten since I've been on the island, ever since you were killed." I took Jim back to the canoe and showed him all my supplies. "I feel like I've died and gone to heaven," he said. After breakfast, we talked. I told him about how I'd squished the boxbog berries and made it look like my blood. Jim was impressed. He told me Tom Sawyer himself couldn't have come up with anything that smart. I asked Jim what he was doing on the island. "Better not tell," he said. "Why?" "There's reasons. If I told you, you wouldn't tell on me, would you?" "No," I said. I ran off. I couldn't believe it. I'd been taught it was wrong for a slave to run away, but I had given him my word, just as I would any man, and I wasn't about to go back on him. Jim told me that he heard Miss Watson planned to sell him to a man in New Orleans for $800. I couldn't believe it. "Miss Watson's mean, honey," he said. "She's been mean to me, too," I said. "At least she didn't make you read." "I would have liked if she did," he said. That surprised me, but I quickly forgot about it as Jim told me how he had escaped. "When they left to look for your body," Jim told me, "I took my chance. With the river high, logs floated by on regular basis. I took one headed here. That log ride made me a rich man. I hear I'm worth $800. He smiled as he said it. Our island was only 3 miles long and a quarter of a mile deep. I wanted to explore an area I'd seen earlier in the middle of the island. The area was a rocky ridge, thick with bushes and steep faces. Almost to the top, we found a cavern inside the rock, about as large as 3 rooms in a regular house. Jim could stand in it without having to stoop. "Let's bring our things up here," Jim said. "I don't want to climb this every day," I said. "We could hide here. No one could find us without dogs, and there's signs in the air it's going to rain tonight." I finally agreed. We got the supplies from the canoe. By the time we finished, it was dinner time. We cooked at the edge of the cave and had our blankets spread inside. The skies opened up and the rain fell. Darkness came, thunder and lightning. We watched it from the dry room of our little cavern. "Jim, I like this better than anywhere. Pass me more cornbread and fish, would you?" "If you hadn't listened to me, you'd be down there, child," he pointed. "Hungry, soaking wet. I also might have been drowned." The river rose so high that during the next day, Jim and I paddled around on the island in our canoe. Rabbits, snakes, and anything that had to breathe air hunkered on tree limbs and logs to stay out of the flow. The island stayed flooded for several days. Only at night did we allow ourselves to go away from the island where someone might see us. One night, while drifting in the river, we found a plank lumber raft, 9 boards worth. We brought it to the island. Another night, a 2-story house floated by. Jim thought we should climb aboard. Inside, Jim found a man, dead for several days. Somebody had shot him in the back. I wanted to see the dead man, but Jim wouldn't let me look. We found all sorts of clothes and things in the house that we might need later. We loaded everything into the canoe. By the time we started back, we had floated a quarter-mile below the island. Daylight came upon us. I told Jim to lie down in the canoe and cover himself, because I didn't want him getting caught as I paddled to the island. As far as I know, no one saw us. We found $8 coins sewn in some of the dresses we took from the floating house. I think these clothes were stolen, Jim said. How do you figure? I asked. If someone knew the money was sewn into the hems, would they have left the money behind? Whoever had these clothes last didn't know the money was there. They must have killed that man too, I said. It's bad luck to talk about the dead, Jim said. Bad luck? If this is bad luck, I'd like more of it. I held up $8. Bad luck's coming, child, said Jim. Days passed and boredom set in. I wanted to go to town. We decided to dress me as a girl using the clothes we'd found in the floating house. A bonnet would hide my face. When dark came, I paddled to shore. The current drifted me below the town in front of a little shanty. Through the window, I saw a woman. I didn't know her, so I figured she wouldn't know me. I decided she could tell me the latest news about my death and Jim's disappearance. I knocked on the door. All right, Chapter 4. Disguise, the wreck, kings and Frenchmen. Come in here, the woman said. What's your name? Sarah Williams, I said. I told her I traveled by foot from Hookerville, 7 miles south. My mother's sick. I'm hoping my Uncle Abner Moore will help us. I don't know Mr. Moore. My husband will travel with you when he returns. We've only lived here 2 weeks. Times are tough. Yes, ma'am. It would be nice to collect that reward money, she said. What money? Don't you know? The town has offered $300 for a runaway slave and $200 for old man Finn. Folks suspect one of them may have murdered that boy. You've heard about the murder? Yes, ma'am, I said. Awful. Some thinks the runaway slave killed that poor Huck Finn. Others think his own father did it. I couldn't tell her differently. I worried for Jim. The reward money should bring both of them in, she said. Old man Finn has probably left the country, but the black man may be hiding around here somewhere. I talked with the neighbors next door and asked them if anybody lived on Jackson's Island. I stiffened up. They said, no. I didn't tell them I saw smoke from a campfire burning over there yesterday. For $300, I thought to myself it's worth checking out. My husband and another man are going over there tonight. If they find the runaway, we'll split the money, and the black man will be hanged for the murder of Huck Finn. I started squirming. I had to get to Jim. What did you call yourself, she asked. I couldn't remember what I had told her. Mary. I thought you came by the name of Sarah. I do, I said. Sarah Mary Williams. A rat stuck its head out of a hole in the wall. The woman threw a piece of lead at it, but missed it terribly. Can you throw? You try for the next one. She fetched the lead and dropped it in my lap. I closed my legs to catch it. Now, what's your real name? She asked. Huh? Another rat stuck its head out. I threw the lead. If it hadn't jerked its head back, that would have been one sick rat. Is it Bill or Tom? To busy myself, I picked up a needle and thread from the table. I'm not the prettiest girl, I said. I tried to thread the needle, but I shook so badly I kept missing. But you shouldn't make fun of me. I must go. You tell me who you are. Are you a runaway? Yes, ma'am, I said. My name's George Peters. My mother and father both died. The law sent me to a farmer who mistreats me. I couldn't take it anymore, so I dressed in his daughter's clothes and ran away. Please don't send me back. Certainly not, she said. When a cow gets up, which end gets up first? The rear? A horse? The front, I said. What side of a tree does moss grow on? The north. If 10 cows graze on a hillside, how many face one direction? They all face the same way. You are a farm boy, she said. I thought I might catch you in another lie." "No, ma'am." "Well, George, you might fool men with this outfit, but not women. When you thread a needle, hold the needle steady and push the thread through. Don't hold the thread steady and then move the needle. When you throw something, throw it from over your head and miss terribly. And when a girl tries to catch something in her lap, she doesn't clasp her legs together like she's wearing pants. Remember those things." I thanked her and hurried back to the island. I built a fire. Jim and I loaded the canoe, tied it to the raft. We hid and slipped quickly from the island in the darkness as quietly as we could. We saw no one. By 1 o'clock, we had sailed the raft below the island. If a boat came by, we agreed to leave the raft and take the canoe toward shore. We forgot to bring the hunting gun, a fishing line, or anything to eat. I did remember the $8. When daylight came, we hid on the bank. We cut cottonwood trunks and covered the raft to conceal it. When dark came, Jim made a hut on the raft out of some of the planks to keep us cool in the sun and dry in the rain. We also made an extra steering oar in case we lost the one we had. We traveled the next 4 nights and hid during the days. The towns glowed pretty in the night, their lights reflected in twinkles in the slow water. Each night I'd stop at one of the towns and buy 15 cents worth of meal, bacon, or something else to eat. Mornings before daylight, I'd slip into the fields and borrow watermelons, pumpkins, or corn. Pap said it didn't count as stealing as long as you planned on returning what you took. Widow Douglas said stealing equaled stealing, no matter what you called it. I'm sure they both had a little bit of truth, so we only took a little bit of what we saw. The 5th night, we drifted below St. Louis, Missouri. The lightning and thunder played out something awful. That night, we found a wrecked steamboat. On board, we found all sorts of things, including boots, blankets, clothes, books, a spyglass, 3 boxes of cigars, all kinds of useful things. We'd never been so rich. I picked up a book and started reading to Jim. It made me glad to know how to read. We couldn't move around during the day. Reading about kings, dukes, earls, and such passed the time. I didn't realize so many kings lived and breathed, Jim said. Of course, I read to him about Louis XVI. Why do they talk so funny? Asked Jim. They don't talk like us, I said. For example, what would you do if someone came up to you and said, Potty is Frankie? If somebody said that to me, I'd hit him over the head for calling me such. He's not calling you anything, I laughed. He's asking if you speak French. Then, why doesn't he ask instead of speaking gobbledygook? He is. Listen, do you think a cat speaks like a cow? No, Jim said. Then how do you expect a Frenchman to speak like us? A cat isn't a man. A man ought to speak like a man, not a cow. I didn't argue any more. Jim had his own way of seeing the world. All right, Chapter 5, In the Fog. A White Lie, Missing Cairo. In 3 nights we expected to get to Cairo, Illinois. That's where the Ohio River connects with the Mississippi River. We planned to sell the raft in Cairo and board a steamboat up the Ohio into the Free States, so Jim didn't have to worry anymore about anybody selling him. The fog rolled in. We knew we couldn't navigate safely, so I jumped into the canoe and pulled the raft through the fog and swift waters towards an island. The island turned out to be nothing more than a high place with a few saplings. Afraid to go on, I tied the raft to a sapling. But the current became too strong, pulled up the sapling, and took Jim and the raft downriver in only a few seconds. They both disappeared. I called. Jim answered back. In the fog, I couldn't see anything. I tried to catch him. Sometimes he'd be on the left side. I'd paddle towards him. Then he'd be on the right. I'd paddle there. Then I lost him completely. I called, but he didn't answer. Finally, I let the canoe go where it wanted. When I awoke, the stars twinkled clearly at first. At first I thought I had been dreaming, but then I realized what had happened. I worried for Jim. I saw a black speck in the water ahead. I quickly rowed to it, probably a mile downriver, and saw the raft. And sure enough, there was Jim, asleep. I quietly climbed aboard. The hut had almost collapsed. Twigs and sticks littered the raft. It took several pokes before Jim awoke. He began to cry. "I thought you'd been drowned, child. I didn't know where you'd gone." "Drowned? Gone? Have you been drinking whiskey?" I asked. When would I drink? You're talking so crazy. Haven't you been gone? I've been sitting here talking to you until you fell asleep 10 minutes ago." Jim looked confused. "No," he said. He then told me all about the night according to how he remembered it, how he couldn't find me, and how he didn't care if he lived or died after losing me. "But I never went anywhere, Jim. You must have seen this in a dream." Jim trusted me more than any person on earth, I think. "Are you telling me the truth?" "Yes. I had to fight to keep him from laughing. Then, that's the most frightening dream I've ever had," he said. He then went on to interpret it, telling me what the islands meant, what the fog meant, what the white water meant. His face changed. "If I had a dream, then what happened to our hut?" I couldn't hold it. I laughed until my belly hurt. Jim looked hurt. "My heart broke because I thought you had drowned," he said. "When you woke me up, I could have kissed your feet. And you want to play me for a fool?" He crawled into what remained on the hut. I tried to get him to come back out, but he wouldn't do it. After about 15 minutes, I humbled myself and apologized. I felt so bad I could have kissed his feet. Jim couldn't wait to get to Cairo, because as soon as he got there, he'd be a free man. I wanted him to get there too. Yet, I felt wrong. What had Miss Watson ever done to me, besides trying to teach me to read, that I should treat her this way, by helping her slave her property escape? But in my mind, Jim didn't seem like property anymore. I felt torn between what I'd been taught and what I felt. I learned two rights. Two rights are not always the same thing. One had to be wrong. "As soon as I'm free," Jim said, "I'm going to save my money. I'm going to buy my wife from Mr. Blake. Then we'll both work and save. And then we'll buy our two children from Masters Dolan and Crisfield. And if those slave owners don't sell, I'll hire an abolitionist to steal them." Such talk put shivers through my spine, because it went against everything I had been taught. I couldn't take it anymore. Surely every white person I knew couldn't be wrong. I had to turn Jim in. "Cairo!" Jim shouted when he saw the lights of a town. "I'll go ashore," I said. "You're the best friend I ever had," Jim said. "I've never known a white man to keep his word to me. I'll owe you for my freedom." Before I could get to shore, two men came by in a skiff. "Is that your raft up there?" one asked. "Yes." "Anybody on it?" "Yes." "Black or white?" I wanted to tell the truth, but I couldn't betray Jim. Something inside me told me wrong had to be right. "White. 5 slaves escaped. We've got to capture them before they reach freedom," the other man said. "I think we'll just see for ourselves." "Please do," I said. "It's my pap. He's got smallpox. We need help." "Smallpox," the first man yelled. "Do you want to infect us? Please, we need help." "We can't take the chance, boy," the second one said. "Here." The man put a gold piece on a floating slab of wood. "I'll float this $20 to you. Add my 20 more," the first man said. "We're afraid to come near even you, son, but we wish you the best." I cried like I was upset. Then I fished the money from the water as soon as the men sailed away. I caught up with Jim and showed him the $20 coins. I felt good about the money, but I felt awful that I'd lied to those men. And I'd done even more wrong. I hadn't turned Jim in. Then I thought how I'd feel if I had turned Jim in. I'd feel awful both ways. What's the good of a conscience if you don't feel better after doing one or the other. Jim saw that I was kinda low. You be strong, honey. We'll get to Cairo soon enough. But we didn't get to Cairo. Farther down the river, we realized that we were headed down the Mississippi toward Arkansas, farther into slave country. We figured we must have passed the turn up the Ohio River way back in all that fog. I should have kept a better watch, I told Jim. Don't blame yourself, Huck. You didn't know. We'll figure something out. You just be strong, child. You just be strong. We made a plan. We would abandon the raft and take the canoe back upriver to Cairo before somebody caught Jim. The sun was rising to the east, so we decided to wait until the next night. That day we slept. At night we sneaked to our canoe, but the canoe had disappeared. Because we couldn't make any time pushing the raft upriver against the current, we had no choice but to continue downriver until we could buy a canoe. Borrowing one might send people after us. We heard a steamboat. The weather had turned bad, and we lit a lantern so the steamboat wouldn't run us over. Normally, boats traveling upriver stay to the easier shallow water and never get near the swift channel used by vessels going downriver. When fog or bad weather sets in, though, they share the deeper channel, afraid they might run aground in the easier water. That put us both on the same path. The steamboat came on top of us before we saw her, or she saw us. Bells went off on the steamboat telling the engineer to stop the engines, but before they could stop, the steamboat cut right over our raft. Jim fell overboard on one side and I fell on the other. I dived straight for the bottom to keep from being chopped up by the 30-foot paddle wheel. I held my breath underwater for about a minute and a half until my lungs almost burst. When I finally had to shoot up out of the water, the steamboat was tugging up the river, not caring if it had killed us or what. I called out to Jim, but he never answered. I swam to shore. I walked about 2 miles downriver thinking that if Jim had swam to shore, he probably wouldn't trouble himself to swim upstream. Sure enough, there was Jim, hiding in a clump of blackberry bushes. I was never so glad to see him. I jumped in the bushes myself. He ran to me and hugged me when he saw me coming, and he had our raft. He said he hadn't heard me calling him because he was too busy swimming downstream trying to catch the raft. We were never both so happy to get back out on the river in that open, free of the Mississippi.